Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm John Kiriakou here in the studio with my co-host Michelle Witte. The Commerce Department this morning released data showing that the economy grew in the third quarter at a sluggish 0.6%, which was annualized to 2.6%. The White House says that means that there's no recession. But 0.6% is within the margin of error and is subject to revision in the coming months. Consumer spending here in the U.S. rose by just 0.4%. That's down from 0.5%. Spending on spending on goods fell, but spending on services rose modestly. In the meantime, home mortgage rates have surged above 7%, and the European Central Bank will soon raise interest rates to try to hold off the strength of the dollar. In politics, the races in which there is the clearest difference in ideologies appear to be the same races tightening the most. Pennsylvania Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman may have dealt himself a death blow because of his debate performance a couple of nights ago. In Georgia, a second woman has gone public now to say that Republican Senate nominee Herschel Walker pressured her to have an abortion. And the Arizona Senate race between incumbent and former astronaut Mark Kelly and Secretary of State Blake Masters is just about literally tied. Filmmaker Michael Moore is predicting a blue tsunami, but he must be looking at different polls than I'm looking at. We're joined by Steve Grumbine, founder and CEO of the nonprofits Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, and host of the podcast Macro and Cheese. He's also a leading activist and evangelist for modern monetary theory. Steve, it's always great to have you. Welcome back.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Steve, Michael Gapin, the chief U.S. economist for Bank of America, said this morning that we should ignore these numbers because international trade, which is sensitive to a strong dollar, often skews growth numbers. He maintains that growth is slowing and that we will continue to remain in recession. What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, if you get rid of the FIRE sector and look at the real economy, look at what people are dealing with in terms of real wages and in terms of actual sales for real goods and services, I think you'll realize that the gas and oil industry have done quite well, whereas rank and file workers and so forth have not. So while on paper this may appear to be a non-recession or a zero growth moment, possibly even negative growth, it's trending negative, and they're forcing it with this interest rate hike. Mm-hmm. So one of the things you said in the monologue is the strong dollar, and by them hiking up the interest rates, what they're in fact doing is causing poverty around the world. So when there's poverty around the world, they can't buy. So that directly impacts purchases for sure. Mm-hmm. So some of what you said there was absolutely true. I personally don't see us coming out of this. There's without a very, very sizable influx of federal spending, I don't know how we avoid a significant recession, short of them stopping the interest rate hikes and doing some tax cuts or something, because it's just awful. I don't see a blue sky on the end of this.
Yeah. So you think we're still in recession? Is it even possible to grow one's way out of a recession despite high interest rates unless you just spend?
It really comes down to spending, right? I mean, just remember, and I hopefully your audience and you guys will remember, money can only come into the economy a couple different ways. One of them is the federal government or nation's government spend that money into existence. And then the other one is people take on private credit, and those dollars, which are just really bank loans, stay in the economy until they're paid off. So really, in order to avoid a recession, you really kind of need an influx of federal spending. Now, there's evidence, and I think this is what you're seeing right now. There's evidence that during the pandemic, people paid down a lot of their disposable credit card debt. So what they're banking on is that people can go back into debt. Individuals go back into debt to fix this. So that to me is the name of the game right there. The elimination of federal spending, replacement theory of credit spending, credit which has interest rate hikes on it, and people who will then in turn do whatever they need them to do, because you remember the Great Resignation took a lot of people out of the workforce.
Yes.
So by doing this, it solves a number of problems that they're trying to solve, and making our lives easier would only stand in the way of that larger picture.
I want to ask you, Steve, about corporate greed. It's no secret at all that the big oil companies are making unprecedented profits. Shell announced this morning that they were paying zero windfall profits tax in the UK, despite record profits there. Barron's and Wall Street Journal have upgraded the stocks of Exxon, Chevron, Shell, and BP to strong buy. Why haven't governments done more to rein in predatory corporate profits in this period of high inflation?
Well, I mean, part of me wants to say, why do you think, John? But in fairness, let's just be, I don't think a lot of people really grasp the extent of the neoliberal framework, of the way they think. It's a model, it's a system that they believe strongly in. And to do what you would be saying, which would be the right thing to do, they won't do it because they simply need that invisible hand. They need the market to be free to do what it wants to do. They want people to believe that they too can become trillionaires. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of this comes down to the concept of freedom spelled with a D-U-M-B, not the D-O-M version. And that really is why. It really is ideological.
Yeah, I think you're right. Pew Research published a study that Michelle mentioned just a few minutes ago, in which it noted a decline in the number of Americans who have positive views of socialism. 36% of Americans currently view socialism as very or somewhat positive. That's down from 42% in May of 2019. What do you attribute this to? Is it that most Americans, and I say this with complete sincerity, most Americans don't have even the most vague understanding of what socialism is?
You got it, brother. I mean, this is in my opinion, what you're looking at is society has largely been replete of any information about what socialism is. Like, when you think about what Margaret Thatcher's famous line is, there is no alternative, okay? This is the neoliberal framework for how they teach in schools as well. And this goes back to Milton Friedman. This goes back to the 70s. And they've only refined their practice since Reagan, then Clinton, then, and on and on and on. And it's only gotten worse and worse and worse because, you know, the ratchet effect, where each election cycle we have the most existential right-wing Republican threat to face. We have to simultaneously support right-wing Democrat candidate because to do anything other would be uncivilized. And so we get into this lose-lose position where it just keeps going further and further rightward. And that corresponds with what our children are taught in schools. That corresponds with, interestingly enough, if you follow the aesthetic of like journalism and theater and movies, all the things that are said during that period of time reflect the neoliberal order of that time. So now things that are coming out are reinforcing these scarcity narratives. So socialism then in turn takes on this boogeyman effect, the McCarthy scare, on and on and on. And there's still a lot of people, older people, generation that remembers Duck and Cover and remembers nuclear scare and remembers Sting singing, Russians and so forth. Right. So we've got a lot of, people that genuinely just don't know, and they have a false attribution from what they fear to anything I fear must be socialism.
Exactly.
And so it's just a big catch-all. It's just a big grab bag. It's like, I'm determined to hold on to the word progressive. I don't want to give it up, even though it's been co-opted by centrists and other very, very establishment shills. I know what it means to me, and I refuse to allow them to steal it once again. Yeah. And I refuse to allow them to lie about what socialism is. If you think about this, can you think of anything that a GOP blue-collar worker would be more embracing of than workers' rights and the freedom for themselves to be able to not be crushed by the man?
Right.
I mean, to me, this is socialism is really a description of the, I want to call it a spectrum, because I fall on the far left of that. Not quite anarchist, but I definitely fall in that big SC word in there. And when you think about it, being that it is a bit of a spectrum in terms of where ownership lies, is it total and complete end of privatization? Now you're into communism. If you're talking about kind of a mixed thing, you're talking about that social democrat type role. And it's kind of like a spectrum of socialism. So people are so dumbed down that they just think socialism means free stuff. I mean, on and on and on. That the idea of helping people realize, hey guys, we're looking at you, your family, having a piece of your pie that you create, instead of giving it to some dude who's out there on a freaking 700-foot yacht smoking a Cohiba, drinking Grand Marnier.
Exactly. Steve, on Facebook the other day, I'm a member of my hometown, I'm from Newcastle, Pennsylvania Facebook page. That's what it's called. And there's a very popular Mexican restaurant there that opened up about 20 years ago, El Canelo. My kids loved it. And they're all Mexican guys that run it, or that work there at least. And then somebody wrote a post saying, hey, I just went to El Canelo again. And did you know, one of the waiters told me that the owner keeps all of their tips. They don't get to keep any of the tips. And then somebody commented, that's socialism for you. And usually I ignore these morons, but I wrote, actually, that's capitalism. Socialism would be if the waiters owned the restaurant. And I said, you might want to take a 6th grade civics class. I couldn't help but to be nasty. But people don't understand.
Your 6th grade civics, they would be capitalists if they took their 6th grade civics class. That's the problem.
Yes.
That's the problem.
Yes, that's true.
Sorry.
Steve, let's talk for a minute about politics, if we could. I personally thought it was brave of John Fetterman to go forward with a debate against Mehmet Oz for the Pennsylvania Senate seat. He knew he was going to have trouble. He knew it. He warned us in advance. Still, though, this debate was painful to watch. Fetterman hasn't yet recovered from a serious stroke that he suffered in May. A poll released today shows Fetterman still leading, but within the margin of error, 47 to 45. What do you make of this race as we head into the last week and a half before the election?
The most troubling thing I can tell you about this race, it comes down to understanding the role of fracking in the state of Pennsylvania.
Oh, my God. I just said that yesterday. You're exactly right.
Yes.
You're exactly right.
It is 100% a misunderstanding of what's going on here. I've worked around roadways within the state, and roadway organizations, large non-government agencies within the state that deal with roadways, et cetera. And one of the things that jumps out is the Marcellus Shale.
Yes.
And so the Marcellus Shale funds a lot of roadway production in this country, not country, but the state. And as a result of that, you know that the very, very heavily Republican Senate and Congress of Pennsylvania, kind of playing off of typical Democrat governor, they can't pass anything to fund schools. They can't raise property taxes, and they can't do any form of tax change in this state at all, zero. The only thing that they can get a little truck from is possibly taxing fracking to be able to fund schools and things like that. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. Is the most disgraceful, disgusting thing to think that whatever you tax, you legitimize. So if you're going to fund programs based on fracking, that means you've got to hope to God that fracking stays in place.
Yeah.
If you're going to tax billionaires to fund programs, that means you sure as hell better hope those billionaires stay billionaires so they can continue to fund your program. Otherwise, they're done. It's over, right? And so what ends up happening in this state, because we're fighting for a Green New Deal, we're fighting for climate, crisis here. We're fighting to build a society that understands the inequality we've done to the whole world with our massive energy consumption in the global north while simultaneously pilfering the global south. Yeah. We know these things. And yet, in order to give our kids and everything else something, we have to find a way to fund schools. And so they've come up with this thing with fracking, and it is horrible. And it's an impossible situation to navigate because they're fracking. And unless you can ban fracking, which there's no energy for in this state, as you know, unless you can ban it, the only thing they can do is tax it and hope they can find some silver lining out of this horrific thing. Now, I am for banning fracking altogether, by the way. And I'm also for having federal funding only because, as you know, I am a modern monetary theory guy. I know it's impossible for me to process the typical narratives without falling back to that. In fact, let me tell you, I went a step further. Yesterday, I did a show. I stand by. Please check it out on Real Progress in Action, where I talk about the intertwined nature of the military-industrial complex and the states. And because states are in this horrible race to the bottom, slashing and burning taxes, slashing and burning public services, they're competing with each other for the Amazons to come headquarter themselves in their backyard. But by doing that, the race to the bottom is complete, which also tells you why trying to fund big initiatives at the state level is stupid. But anyway, neither here nor there. In this case, John Fetterman is standing up there, screwed from a stroke. He's literally trying to be the man, but he's got a lot of progressives rightfully angry at him for not being the climate guy that we need, okay? And yet here's this very, very real politic dynamic that fracking is not going away in the state of Pennsylvania. Right now, there's no energy for it at all. And you don't have your schools funded, and you've got a GOP Congress that is literally not willing to do anything. And to be fair, it's not just GOP. We got a lot of conservative Democrats in the state as well who look and smell and everything else quack just like a GOP. So with that in mind, it's an impossible situation. And I think that's largely what you're seeing here with John Fetterman, is that the base that would support him to keep this far more elevated is really disgusted by his stance on fracking. The flip side is that the other side is equally eager to find any weakness in Fetterman so they can put up Oz. And I think that's your dynamic. And I think, sadly, because Fetterman went out there, I don't care about the good freshman try. He should not have been on that stage. It was evident in every way, shape, or form. He, you know, for better or for worse, this is what we're now dealing with. So, you know, it'll be very interesting to see. Pennsylvania has always been a very purple state. We've got lots of stars and bars and Harleys and all the other stereotypes out here, gun racks and you name it. And, you know, but yet at the same time, we've got some progressive people that are thinking about the future. But it's a very weird state. It's the weirdest state in the union, in my opinion.
And the most corrupt.
You know, because it is so purple. Yes, exactly.
More corrupt than Illinois.
Oh, yeah. It's bad.
Florida?
Oh, yeah. There's no comparison. Steve, you're in Pennsylvania, are you not?
I am indeed. I'm right in the capital out here in Harrisburg.
I thought so. Well, moving on to Georgia. A Fox News poll this morning shows Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock leading Herschel Walker 49-45. 538.com has Warnock ahead 47-45. But Georgia is a runoff state. And if neither candidate gets 50%, there's a runoff election in December. There was news this morning that a second woman has come forward saying that Herschel Walker forced her to get an abortion. Where do you see this race going?
I think there's going to be a red tide in this country. It's unfortunate. Well, you know what? Let's talk about a dual path here. Is it unfortunate? Yes, it's horrifically unfortunate because the things that the right wing want to do are everything we don't want them to do. That's a true statement. The flip side is that the rank and file vote blue sycophant is doing almost everything we don't want them to do. Okay. So with this kind of, we're just going to do the least amount of harm, we're still doing harm. And the thing is that there is no, I'm sure you're aware, there's no real energy for quote unquote, even an intellectual revolution, much less a policy revolution. There is probably a bit of energy on the right wing for a violent revolution, but not the kind we would want. And so at the end of the day, I really genuinely believe that if this goes to runoff, the GOP is far more energized. Biden has been a feckless president. Every chance he's had to slam the door. I mean, if he would have eradicated student debt, they would be putting another head at Mount Rushmore with his face. I mean, for real, I would bend over and say, "Let me kiss your rump, Biden." It would be a first time I did that, right? It would be like, "Hey, way to go, dude." Okay. Now, the flip side to that is that let's look at it in a different way. Let's look at it as, hey, how do we, since we don't have any energy for a real revolution from the left, and we don't have enough whatever we need from the left at this point, how do we mitigate harm? And to that degree, there's logic that says, hey, vote blue no matter who, if you will. And I'm not in that camp, but I can understand it. I mean, it's not irrational to think that way when you see what the other side is doing. So with a Herschel Walker, okay, this guy, I mean, he is potato, right? I mean, there's nothing firing between the ears there. It's ridiculous.
No, nothing.
So the idea of him, of all things, this is one of the very few times where gotcha politics works. He is trying to say he's this pro-life candidate. He's this right-wing, bastion of right-wingness. And here he is going out and, committing this, pushing for abortion. So it's kind of hard to wear that well. And for people that are truly anti-abortion, they are going to see that. And I think that will have an impact at some level. And I guess the question is how many Pumas are going to come out and vote blue no matter who down there in support of Warnock.
Right.
I think that's really what it comes down to.
Agreed. The Cook Political Report moved the Arizona Senate race from likely Democrat to leaning Democrat this morning to toss-up. 538.com shows Mark Kelly leading Blake Masters 47-44. What do you make of the situation in Arizona? It seems like of all the states, this is the one that has the clearest ideological division between MAGA Republicans and those farther to the left. What do you think?
I genuinely believe that this is a referendum on Stop the Steal.
Yes.
Period.
Yes, it is.
And I think that in and of itself is going to tell you a lot about the mental capacity of our nation. Because, look, I think it's very, very hard to get too mean, if you will, to people that have lost faith in whether or not the voting system works to their advantage. I think it's completely wrong-minded to be angry at people who no longer have faith in elections either, because it's not their fault that they've been duped over and over again, and they're wondering, why do I keep doing this? Okay, why do I believe this? So to take that a step further, which is always what happens in this country, it's not hard to believe that somebody would say, hey, it's probably possible. They just don't like Donald Trump. Everything was Trump fear porn when he was in office. Every single news thing, they lived and died off of his tweets. I mean, literally everything, the entire energy of the country was founded on chasing Trump's tweets.
Yes.
Now, some of them were really egregious, but they were tweets, okay?
Right.
So now here we are. I can see people, kind of seeing Trump in a weird, perverse underdog way and rallying around that. I mean, who doesn't like an underdog? And so these are things you've got to be careful of when you demonize somebody who is really demonic. The further in you go, and these vote blue sycophants, my goodness, they wanted to make sure he was the poster child. Well, once they made him the poster child, they had the adverse effect of deifying.
Yes.
And so now you've got to contend with a deity in Arizona. And so if the Democrats lose, they only have themselves to blame, especially those who are running around calling Trump Cheeto-leany and Tiny Hands and Donnie, whatever, all the other, you know them.
Oh, yeah. I see it on Twitter constantly.
It's not that they're not true.
Yeah. Yep. Steve, I have agreed with everything that you've said. Thank you so much for those insights. That was really fun. Steve Grumbine, founder and CEO of the nonprofits Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, and host of the podcast Macro and Cheese. Steve is also a leading activist and evangelist for modern monetary theory. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. We're going to take a short break, and then